strategy. We have Zimasa Vazi, who is the Partnerships and Stakeholder Relations Manager in that unit.
All right, so being from the partnership, well, my title is the Partnership and Stakeholder Relations Manager, but I, of course, represent the Employment Strategy Unit within the PCC. So, of course, let's quickly take a look at the lay of the land, looking at the socioeconomic aspect of youth. So as many of you here would know and understand, perhaps even better than me, is that the youth of South Africa continue to be disadvantaged in South Africa's labor force. You'll see that the youth's unemployment rate is higher than the national average. So this data we thought perhaps it's prudent to use data from the last census. So looking at the 15 to 24-year-olds, there are many young faces here, so I imagine there are a few who fit into that category. So for that, we have an unemployment rate of 64% approximately. Then if you look at 25 to 34, you have a 42% employment rate. Of course, these numbers are quite alarming. The national rate currently stands at approximately 35%. Those that are graduates, many in the room here are, their unemployment rate has declined to 36%. Unfortunately, in our country, access to education, especially STEM, remains a challenge. This presents quite a challenge for the Presidential Commission, particularly as we move towards the transition to the low economy. So in terms of the Employment Strategy Unit, our name says it all. So in many organizations, you'll find that units like ours is titled maybe economic development, economic diversification. So we were quite intentional in calling ourselves, our unit, the Employment Strategy Unit, because our focus is, of course, on job creation. And that's particularly critical given how economic development, economic diversification can, of course, result in jobless growth, which is quite problematic for South Africa. Looking at our focus, it's around our research. Our flagship currently is the social ownership model in renewable energy. It's around creating social partnerships for employment generation, skills development, and also looking at directly at employment creation. So you'll see our approach is it's a multi-pronged approach. But for today's discussion, we'll specifically be looking at the employment strategy or our research on the Mpumalanga economic opportunities within the short term, and also the social partnership work, because that, of course, focuses on our targeted at-risk value chain, which, of course, is the coal value chain. Starting with the Mpumalanga employment opportunities for the short term. Here, what we have done is take a demand approach specifically led by the private sector. Because there's a dire need to create employment now in Mpumalanga, our focus is on the creation of sustainable employment within the short term. So what we want to see is the realization of sustainable jobs in Mpumalanga by 2030. The approach that we took in this work was two-pronged. We started off looking at the existing economy, which is largely tourism agriculture, and the likes. And then this is now specifically focused in the high belt or in the coal belt, looking at growing new parts of the economy, looking at new industries. So we took a two-pronged approach here. In terms of the growing the existing industry, so there we were fortunate to be able to rely on secondary data. However, the emerging industry, I mean, of course, it's not existing. So what we had to do is collect a great deal of primary data to inform the recommendations for employment generation in Mpumalanga. So we have three, in terms of the report, there are three established industries that we are looking at expanding, and then 4 emergent opportunities. And of course, those ones, we envision them specifically for the Coal Belt, for Nkangala and Gert Sibande district. So from that 7, through an extensive stakeholder consultation process, we asked our stakeholders from that 7, based on your knowledge and your experiences, select 6. So from that 7, we brought that down to 6, and we are now currently in the process of doing a deep dive into that 6. From the 6, we'll then develop 4 roadmaps for 4 industries, of course, to guide in terms of growing the economy in that space. I've spoken about our extensive stakeholder consultation and the roadmaps, but what is critical, because this work specifically looks at the short term, this must feed into a larger process for the long term. Our colleagues at the department, the Office of the Premier in Mpumalanga, through the support of the World Bank, they are then developing an economic diversification strategy for the long term. This work that we are currently busy with will then, of course, feed into that. Then quickly, in terms of the partnership implementation model, which I think is quite critical for the people in the room here. So similar to the work that we've just given an overview on, here we're also looking at economic diversification. Now, what's different is that this work relies on the experiences or the lived experiences of those communities in the Coal Belt. Similarly to the Mpumalanga Employment Opportunities Research, here we're also looking to diversify those local economies. Now, what's critical is in the process in terms of how this will be done. We've been currently working on bottom-up engagements, and it actually goes beyond just engagements, but working with communities within the Coal Belt to identify bankable and livelihood projects to diversify their spaces. The question then becomes why? From what we see in the country, we are experiencing a crisis of implementation. This is particularly profound within Mpumalanga. I mean, the coal value chain there has received a lot of support from various people. It's business, it's our international organizations, local organizations, government, a plethora of people. But the challenge lies in how there's really been no impact on the ground. So in as much as so many people are working in that space, working towards driving diversification, at this stage, we have very little to show. Our view as the PCC is that the problem lies in our lack of collaboration as different partners. So for us to experience and see the change that we want, collaboration as partners and stakeholders is fundamental. Our ethos here with the partnership implementation model is co-creation, co-planning, co-design, and co-implementation. The focus is on a bottom-up process instead of a top-down process. Of course, both of these approaches have their advantages and disadvantages, but what we're seeing currently in the country is not enough initiatives that bring partners together to implement collectively. This is how we think that we are more likely to see implementation, because economic diversification is a difficult one. It's quite complex. Not one organization, the PCC themselves, cannot do this alone. Not one organization has the mandates, the resources, the ideas to address the socioeconomic challenges of the Cobalt, of Mpumalanga, of the youth in the country. What's required is a collaborative approach to get these solutions, a whole of society approach. In terms of these collaborative partnerships, what is key, of course, is a systems approach, a holistic approach, which drives towards a single understanding, or rather a shared understanding and a shared future vision for the just transition, particularly within the Cobalt. This is the roadmap for the project. I don't think I've got sufficient time for that. But essentially, this roadmap drives at partnerships for action and improved results. Because quite frankly, I'm so tired of talking and seeing nothing. So if I'm tired, I can only imagine how my people in the Cobalt are feeling. These are the key components of the project. In terms of its implementation, the focus groups, community forums, private forum, the public forum, and of course, the union forum, organized labor, they will then feed into an integrated forum, bringing everybody together for a shared vision and a shared understanding of the just transition. But of course, most importantly, for that pipeline of bankable and livelihood projects for implementation within the Cobalt. I think, let me pause here and hand over to Ms. Program Director.
Thank you, Zimasa. So for this part of the program, we won't be taking questions immediately after the presentation. So we'll take all three presentations and then we'll do a round of questions for all the three presenters. And I hope as our units are presenting here, you're busy identifying the areas where you can also engage or put in more work, or you are identifying some of the gaps that exist that are important for young people to advance the just transition. The next speaker is from the Climate Mitigation Unit, and that is Ms. Simphiwe Ngwenya. She is a program manager in the unit.
Thank you, Ntabiseng. Good afternoon, everyone. Ntabiseng has introduced me, and I do work in the mitigation team of the PCC as a program manager. And until recently, the mitigation team was 3 people, but now there's 4 of us. And Bridget, who is in the mitigation team, is here with us. So we've got an additional member. And before I actually go into the work that we do as the mitigation team and how it falls into the bigger picture of the PCC, I really just want to congratulate all of you guys. Maybe premature with regards to your essays and that you are here and we are launching today. I had the opportunity to work with Unosipho Dube and William Sekhobela, And it was really it was great working with them, because they actually availed themselves. And, you know, they were there for meetings and really wanted to see their essays published. So thank you, guys. And then, so just now going into the presentation in terms of the mitigation team. So the work that we do as the team, the mitigation team of the PCC, is to really advise. So the work of the PCC, we are an advisory body on the just transition. And within that, our work is to advise on the mitigation pathways for the various sectors, right? So it includes electricity, it includes transport, it includes all the sectors of the economy. And so the reason we do that is because as we transition, some sectors are at risk, some sectors are even more at risk than others, but they have more opportunities in terms of how quickly they can transition because of technology development and innovation. And so our goal is to do this, is really to ensure that, is to influence policy and decision making, so that policymakers can send the right signals through having better access to information and therefore enabling better outcomes. And we do this through research programs, and that is really anchored on modeling. So we work very closely with the country's modeling teams to model pathways for the future and really use these results to support decision making. I'd like to stress that the modeling results themselves have assumptions in terms of the inputs, and they are really founded by science and rooted on science. And you know, because they are based on assumptions, and although rooted on science and the methodology there are elements that involve, you know, human decision making. And that's why the element of connecting the demand side, who are the policy and user groups, as well as the supply side, who are the researchers, is so important. So our core goal is to connect the modeling capacity of South Africa, or the researchers and experts, with the decision makers who really, you know, create and form the policy. And the reason we want to do this, so this is actually there's two things to this. With regards to the supply side, the experts and the researchers who are academia and other, you know, private people, what we are finding is that South Africa has really good research and especially modeling capability. However, it's very thin and few. So what happens is, for example, at the CSIR, if one person leaves the team and they get a better opportunity, and they often get poached by international organizations, and they get a better opportunity, then that department would crumble, and it takes them a while to build up. So it's to build the modeling capacity of the country, but also to make sure that our decision makers have access to these modeling outputs and research and work that is done. But also so that they co-create these models with the analytical community. Because what we found in having conversations with the decision makers is that sometimes they will say that these models are created without, you know, proper, in-depth, meaningful consultation, and therefore, you know, their thinking is really incorporated later on. So that's what we aim to do as we transition as the mitigation team of the PCC, and really advise on net zero pathways for the economy within a low carbon economy that is really in line with our Paris Agreement, or a 1.5 degree pathway leading up to 2050. And the IPCC sixth assessment results synthesis report that came out last year actually kind of indicates that we might not be currently on a path where we can get to 1.5 degrees. So what does that mean for the economy, where climate change impacts are already happening? Okay, so most of our work, as I said, is to advise on mitigation pathways for the country. And because the power sector is responsible for a bulk of the emissions, our work has largely focused on electricity. We are doing work in the transport sector. I'll get into that at the end. But right now, in the beginning, I'm really going to be focused on electricity because it has been the focus of our work. And it is because of the reason that the IRP in itself has been, is now out, has been gazetted for public comment. It came out in January. But last year, the Minister Mandashi actually said to the PCC, and that if now that we have committed to the NDCs, which really it shows that South Africa's commitment towards reducing its emissions, what would an electricity mix look like within that? And the PCC went on an in-depth consultation with all our stakeholders, even in person in some locations, where we consulted on what we, through the research, think an ideal pathway would be. And so when the IRP was gazetted for public comment earlier this year, the IRP came out, and really what is important about the IRP is that what everyone and all stakeholders agree is that it is really an important electricity and planning development for the country. It not only speaks to electricity planning, but it really is linked to economic development for the country, because energy or electricity really is the backbone of the country's economy. And we've seen how the lack thereof is now impacting, the GDP and economic growth of the country. And so the PCC is now on a path where we are getting together and where we are compiling and collating the commissioner views or the inputs of the current IRP, as well as the broader stakeholders. And we would then be submitting that to the minister as well as the president in terms of recommendations, but added to that would be the stakeholder views. And I just want to really just provide an overview of the thoughts so far and what we've collected in terms of the IRP in itself. And so the electricity planning for our recommendations as the PCC was really rooted on the energy trilemma, where energy security is really important and environmental sustainability is critical, in that, people need to have access to electricity that is not harmful to the environment or their health. So in terms of air quality, and even water, but also access is really critical. So access in terms of energy security, but also in terms of affordability in itself. So we're a country where people are still struggling with energy poverty, and this is in terms of access to electricity, but also in terms of being able to afford electricity. Some people cannot afford electricity. So the IRP is essentially meant to support all of these issues, and it is a living plan that's supposed to be reviewed regularly, and it's got focused on multiple policy objectives. So this is stated in the IRP itself, in that it focuses on security of supply, energy affordability, and carbon emissions reductions, and that ultimately the final policy decisions must be taken on the basis of a long-term decarbonization trajectory, while improving South Africa's competitiveness and growing the economy through industrial renaissance. So the IRP is really supposed to, be cognizant of all of these. And so with that, after analysis within the PCC, so far, what we have gathered is that the IRP is how it is now being framed in terms of the two horizon approach is really useful and innovative. So there is a short term, this is horizon 1, which has 5 scenarios included there. And then there's also horizon 2, which is longer term from 2030 to 2050. So this is really useful in terms of immediate policy and decision making and focus, but also what to work towards in the future, and policy alignment in terms of from 2030 to 2050 onwards. And so what we've noticed from the IRP and what we really agree with is that so in terms of the least cost mix that are proposed in the pathways, they do propose that it is variable renewable energy plus peaking supports plus storage. However, I need to note that we are disagreeing with the quantum of, the allocations of each of the energy types, that, for example, the amount of gas that has been allocated, but we are, I guess, agreeing with the DMRE in that variable renewable energy plus peaking support plus storage is really a least cost option. And that so really in summary is that the PCC has now agreed to work together. We are working together with the DMRE to unpack the assumptions that are rooted within this modeling. So the one important thing about modeling, which I probably have said before, is that what goes into the modeling. And most stakeholders have really said that there is insufficient information within this. And then so in terms of the critical observations or the critiques that the PCC has put forth in terms of the IRP is that really in its current state, it doesn't address energy security. The IRP acknowledges that in its current state and the plan that they're consulting on, we would have load shedding, I think, up until 2028. Which really then fails to address the developmental context of the country. And the IRP is not a least cost solution and does not address energy access and energy efficiency. So these are things that the DMRE have said they are now really, this is why they had this public consultation, so that they can consult with the public and know what it is possibly that would need to be reiterated within their modeling. And and then the IRP doesn't provide sufficient market signals in terms of strength and consistency to support developmental policies like the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. So it's important that the IRP supports the future economy. So the Renewable Energy Master Plan is really waiting for a signal from the IRP in terms of, the amount of renewable energy that is to be rolled out both now and in the future, and therefore to be able to support localization, especially in the Mpumalanga area, as the master has said. And then, so the scenarios are incomplete as they are currently. The analysis so far is incomplete, and it doesn't support some of the conclusions and observations, as the DMRE refers, that it makes. So there's quite a mismatch between the IRP and the benchmark studies. So within the PCC's electricity recommendations report, we did an assessment of some benchmark studies, and there's a mismatch between that. And then lastly, the IRP does not effectively address the issues of climate change and inequality. So the IRP says that in its current form, they are meeting the current IRP. The modeling shows that we, in up to 2030, we are within our NDC commitments. But, this has really been this issue that there have been disagreements between the DMRE and some of the country's modelers in terms of whether or not we do agree with this, and also equality in that, it is really not considered within the IRP. And then so the PCC has then made the following recommendations in terms of, so we've made 4 high-level recommendations, which can be broken down to test more scenarios, where we recommend that further analysis is required to answer the basic questions that the IRP should address. Especially one of the recommendations we make is that at least a scenario, especially in the short term, that addresses and aggressively addresses load shedding and what it would look like and what would be needed, right? And then for the DMRE, this is now in terms of procedural justice to enhance transparency. So there's a lack of transparency in terms of the data inputs. Whilst the DMRE has actually, released some information, it is still incomplete for any meaningful comparison or analysis. But also the limited time for consultation is problematic. Although the DMRE, we must acknowledge that they have increased or extended the consultation up to where now the deadline is the 23rd of March. So the DMRE, really, we are urging the DMRE to release all the assumptions used in the modeling and to widen the breadth and duration of their consultation. Because some stakeholders have even asked for in-person consultations, for them to go to specific locations. And then lastly, the third one is for the DMRE to engage on benchmark studies, to do a review of the extent of the cost and emissions differences between the IRP 2023 and the PCC review of benchmark studies. And so there's also a concern about a lack of learning curves in the models, where certain technologies, as they are maturing, the cost is decreasing, and therefore that's not incorporated. And then lastly, for the IRP to explicitly deal with air quality, to really incorporate this within the modeling. And so this is the process that we've undertaken. It starts from we started with the energy dialogues just to understand what the future energy mix would look like of the country. We went through a series of consultations, and as I've said earlier, from January to March. And then we actually launched the recommendations report. There's a technical report, which is about 100 pages. And then there's a recommendations report, which was sent to the president, about 20 pages, and the stakeholder report, all on our website. And then now, since the release of the IRP, as I said, we've done some consultations with our commissioners. We've held a public dialogue, but we are also supporting NEDLAC with their IRP process, where the PCC is providing technical support and expertise into this. And then so the PCC's critical appraisal or commissioner input will be finalized in March and then sent to the president as well as the DMRE team. I am almost done, Tapsing. So as the mitigation team, this is now a high level overview of our work, right? And so we are driven by 5 key objectives. As I said, to connect policy makers to better data, information, and tools. So these are some of the modeling projects that we are involved in. It's the social accounting matrix, which was developed for the Mpumalanga region to understand what the economic future of the province looks like within different so there's a 1.5 degree pathway and a net zero pathway and a 2 degree pathway. So within the different pathways. And then we are also thinking about integrated assessment models. So this is really to give South Africa, so this would be a nationwide integrated assessment model. This would give South Africa some power when sitting at the international negotiating tables, because currently the integrated assessment models, most of them are about from the Northern Hemisphere and are not an accurate representation of the Southern Hemisphere and even, the African region. So what would an integrated assessment model for South Africa or the Southern region look like? But we do know that developing it really takes time. It is not like you would just build an integrated assessment model. So it would take years and years to build. So this is something we're working on. And then so we work with the policy community. We work with the National Treasury through the SA Tide modeling program, with the Department of Transport. So we are supporting the Department of Transport with their just transition strategy, and embedded within that strategy is to now align the mitigation targets of the Department of Transport with the NDCs, the current NDCs and future NDCs, because the NDCs are not static. But also what's important to that is the decarbonization of the transport sector, which is now really being pushed by commitments by our trade partners such as EU and the UK in terms of banning the import of internal combustion vehicles. And South Africa, the manufacturing of internal combustion engine vehicles is regionally located. So how do we unlock the barriers to support the transition of this sector? And the first phase looks at road, but it will build on shipping and other parts. And then there's work we do internally within the PCC, and I really want to touch on point 5, and then the others that I haven't covered, we can talk about it if you're interested, afterwards. Driving dialogues. This is an important part of the work that we do. We have an energy dialogue series that we run on core topics. Some of them are really based on stakeholder recommendations. So we had dialogues on green hydrogen. We had a dialogue on new energy vehicles that really came out from stakeholder requests, where they said, so civil society said they would like to know more about green hydrogen, how this is going to impact them in the future. But also, so we've got a very big energy series dialogue that we do drive as the mitigation team, but we've also got a video series that we are, an animated video series that we're working on together with the comms team. And it's to really put out there the work of the mitigation team and explain some of the work that we do, because there's a lot of misinformation, but also sometimes we find that stakeholders really find it hard to understand what we mean when we speak about net zero or 1.5 degree pathways, or even sometimes COP in itself. So there's a big information drive that we are embarking on. Thank you.
Thank you, Simpiwe. I can already see some of the questions online asking if the presentations that we make today will be available online. Yes, the presentations will be available after the session, as well as the recording of the session. So everything that is being presented now, we will, as usual, share it with you. Thank you for that presentation. I would just like to add, before we move on to the next speaker, that we do have another unit in the PCC that focuses on climate finance. So mobilizing of resources for the transition and funding transition pathways. They unfortunately couldn't be here because of other commitments. But that work really feeds into some of the work that's being done by the Just Energy Transition project management unit in the presidency, as you would know them as the JET PMU. They're responsible then for developing the investment plan and now the implementation plan, which is now being rolled out. With that said, I would like to hand over to Mandy Jayakodi from our Climate Adaptation and Resilience Unit.
Thank you very much, Program Director. As introduced, I'm Mandy Jayakodi, and I'm a Just Urban Transition Manager in the Adaptation Unit. I work with 2 other members. We're quite a small team, and there's a lot of work to do. So we're very glad to see many excited faces in the room and where we can move these people into industry. The other team members are Dumasani Ngumalo and Desiga Naidu, who's the lead on the team. So first, I'd like to say congratulations on completing your essays. Well done. And I think I want to say personally thank you to my mentees, Jody, Frank Brown, and Tandiwe Ntlabati over there. Excuse me, over there. Thank you very much for showing up and for doing your part, and that's how things get done. And I hope, Ntabaseng, as we go forward and this event becomes an annual event, we get younger people, younger faces into the room, so that there's a groundswell of movement in the space, in the climate change space, so we can move forward. So moving on, firstly, there we go. So the strategic objectives of the adaptation team. What we're here to do is we are here to facilitate and promote actions that reduce the impacts of climate change and reduce vulnerabilities and improve resilience. You'll see when you talk about adaptation, a lot of the time resilience is mentioned and vulnerabilities. But what is vulnerability? Does anybody know? I'd like a bit of an interactive session here, because you've heard from the technical experts and there's a lot of information, and we assume that everybody's coming from the very, very expert level. But I think it's very important to build the baseline up so that we all are speaking from we're all singing from the same hymn sheet at some point. But let me tell you, let me not put you on the spot. I'm going to later on, so just prepare yourselves. So vulnerability is a country's tendency to be adversely impacted on by climate change, or how likely are we to be affected by it, right? Resilience is the ability of a system to respond to extreme events with little disturbance, and how long it takes for that system to get back to normality. Everybody clear? Good stuff. The other thing we intend to do is we intend to support mechanisms to predict impacts and better build responses. And this might be through technology, through capacitation, through skills development, all of those things. And we do this through the writing in green there. It's the PCC outcomes. So the adaptation team actually fulfills and feeds into and streamlines into the PCC outcomes. Make sense? Now I'm going to ask you, what is adaptation? Because I've been on forums and often people, they miscommunicate it. They talk about mitigation as if it's adaptation. What is adaptation? And I take you right back to a very simplistic term. And I like the way the natural scientists actually describe it. They say adaptation is the process of adjusting to better match an environment or situation. So you adjust for the environment. But I like this one even better, which National Geographic says. It says it is the adjustment of organisms to the environment to enhance their chances of survival. We need to survive. People are dying. And what are we talking about? We are still talking about high-level stuff. Zimartha mentioned it. What is happening on the ground? How do we get to the people on the ground? But I take you back. Humans have been adapting throughout. Wherever we are in the world, you would also see that sometimes adaptation happens concurrently in a similar manner in different regions. Take a look at this. So you will see the little village there with people on the boats. This is Ganvi. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. It is a village in Benin. And this village is built on a lake. The houses are built on stilts, or people actually live in boat houses. And this village dates back to the 17th century. If you look at the houses in Japan, those were traditionally built by, with rice paper and bamboo. Why? Because it's humid. It allows the air in. If there's earthquakes, it's easy to rebuild pretty quickly. The materials are available close by. But also, if you want to rearrange your house, you can do so quite easily also. Look at the Inuit people who lived in and built igloos. I mean, who would have thought that you'd be warm inside an ice kind of casing? That is not intuitive, but materials are available and they're found, it's abundantly, and when they leave it behind, it just forms part of the environment again. Then we've got the metal batula, it's the faceplate. And that was to keep out the dust of the lady's eyes in the desert. But also, when tribes come to fight each other, it makes the women look a little bit like men. So in the distance, you can't really tell how many men and how many women there are. Then the central picture there, and the one with the huskies, both of those are nomads. They actually move. You know what a nomad is? To be able to make use of the season or vegetation or whatever it might be. And the Tuareg tribe is in Africa. That's the one in the center there, as you can see. And the other one is in Siberia. So we can adapt. The question is how. We have to be more open-minded, looking back at indigenous knowledge and understanding the perspectives around us. And that's why also the work that MASA does is very important, because what it does is that it gets that indigenous knowledge, the knowledge on the ground, to us at the PCC. Okay, you will see a lot of it's not a lot of writing. I think we finished with the writing. There's a lot of pictures, and I think it's just easier to understand. And what currently we're finding, and you would have seen it, is that there seems to be a conversation about adaptation versus mitigation. That is not something we should be talking about. It is not a competition. And adaptation looks at the short term, but also considers the long-term impacts. Mitigation is looking at the long-term impacts, or how you address those or minimize those. But that picture, sorry, I didn't show you the picture. So now that picture is very, very interesting, because what it shows is that when you're running a race, a hurdle, I don't know how many of you have run a hurdles race here, but the hurdles are actually the adaptation challenges we have. The finish line is the mitigation challenge. If you do not get over those adaptation challenges, I'm not sure if you'll actually even get to the end of the race. So we have to bear that in mind. I think the complexity with adaptation is that it also offers a regional and a sectorial perspective. So you can't often apply certain things that apply in Europe to us in South Africa. And again, that's where the local knowledge comes in. And mitigation has taken the central stage globally. And this is because it affects us, and it affects Europe also quite globally. It's their agenda that is important, and it's important globally. But we as South Africa also need to focus on the people on the ground and what's happening to them now. This is very, very important. It's also received most of the financing. And it's in the best interest of the African continent that that actually changes for us. The observation actually in the financing is that the private sector and commercial sources have dominated the financing space, and mitigation having achieved most of the financing at 81%. Adaptation is only 12%, and stuff that, or mechanisms that have a dual benefit actually account for only 7% of the funding currently available. And the reason for that is that mitigation projects, a lot of them like the energy projects, you can see the return on investment. But how do we innovate and translate our adaptation projects to be able to create that return? And maybe the question is, how are we measuring return? Are we measuring it in a manner that actually makes sense for us? Because our people matter, our infrastructure matters. And we can't go back and say, when we think about adaptation, we also need to have that long-term perspective in view. And the reason being is that, let's say a building or somebody's house is washed away. You can't go and build it in the same place again with the same technology. We need to bear in mind what's going to happen in the long term, in the near term future, and how do we adapt and change to better future-proof our decision-making and equip our decision makers so that they can make those right decisions. Okay, so I think I've discussed, sorry, I keep changing it on my laptop and then I don't change it there. So this one's very, very interesting. And what this basically says is that we need to take a pragmatic approach and a balanced view on mitigation, adaptation, looking at the residual risks, the climatic event, and the loss and damage. And we know that if we now improve the adaptation, loss and damage is going to be less. So I'd like to read this for you from one of our reports. So it says, the timing and placement of investments into the larger climate change landscape, both in the short and long term, is a strategic imperative. This outlook, coupled with effective planning, is a proactive approach to the risks that humanity faces globally. The urgency for investment into adaptation must be driven by the undesirable physical impacts and the likely costs associated with loss and damage. The implementation of effective adaptation interventions will have a direct correlation to reducing residual risk and loss and damage. And a risk-based approach is very, very necessary. And it also cuts the risk of maladaptation. If investment in adaptation is not done at the right time and in the right place, our liabilities in the future are going to be more. Okay. Gosh. Okay, so this is a very, very interesting index. And this is the Notre Dame index. And what it does, it's an open free source index that ranks approximately 185 countries according to their vulnerability to climate change and their readiness to leverage private and public sector investment for adaptation responses. And you'll see there's different quadrants there. You will have access to these. And it would be nice for you to actually go and have a look at the Notre Dame index to see how it's rated. But South Africa is, you will see, South Africa, you will see it's rated in the quadrant where a country with a low level of vulnerability, and that it depends, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things that can be debated. But we also have a low readiness for investment. Important points to take back as we go through and understand how we prepare for adaptation. Okay, so going back to our team and what we do. So the adaptation team has 4 key areas that we work in. We work in spatial adaptation, and I will give you examples of just one example of each of them. We work in research and development and innovation. We have a sector-based portfolio, and we do also resources and financing. An example of the spatial project that we're doing is the climate Resilient Development Strategy Framework in Nelson Mandela Bay. It's a pilot for our team, but also for the PCC. And basically what this does, and the way I would like to describe it is actually, it's almost an overview of what's important, what are the risks and opportunities in a larger area. And this kind of overview looks at it's supposed to inform investment in the area. And if I can give you an analogy, what it is, and I use this analogy for this thing quite often, but it is, if you're going to play a football match, you have a coach, but your coach needs to understand the circumstances that his team is playing before he sends the team out to play. So who is he playing? Who are you guys playing? Who are the good players? What's the climate like? What's the pitch like? You know, all of those things matter. Who the coach is? What are the pressure points of the other players? And under each of those, you also have different strategies, because you have a strategy for the players. You know that this player can't play very well when he's very tired, or this one has a lot of stamina. So what it does is you look across the range to say, what are the key areas that you can pinpoint that are areas of priority? It is a risk-based approach. So you look at what the risks are and what the opportunities are in this space. So that's what we're doing for Nelson Mandela Bay. And we hope that it's going to inform priority areas and also investment into the certain sectors. The second area is resourcing and financing, and we're working on a just adaptation investment plan. And this is to inform the climate change response fund, which both Blessing and the president spoke about. I think we have to know where we're investing. A lot of the time, investment, but also planning takes place in a very fragmented manner. So we need to have that bird's eye view of where we're putting the money, and then that's where Yuri and them come in also. Is the money working where we're putting? How do we actually make, how do we adapt and respond so that we can actually maximize the outputs of our investment? The sector-based portfolio, which Dumisani is working on, is actually, we've identified 3 sectors which are key currently for South Africa, just because of their vulnerabilities, but also because of the economic downturn that it can have if those are severely impacted. And they are agriculture, water, and the built environment. And he's doing quite a lot of work there, looking at each sector, again, looking at the opportunities and vulnerabilities. Who are the key stakeholders? How do we actually pool all of these resources and pull the stakeholders together so that we can work more effectively? You will know also that cities is a big deal for Africa, because this is where most of the African population is going to be living by 2030, 2050. And it's often referred to as the theater of operation. Now, you know, when you think about that, you don't really, theater of operation, what do they do in a theater? But you have to understand the context. A theater of operation, the guys are in there, the surgeons are in there for a short period of time. They need to make decisions that are quick, that actually are there to save people's lives. And that's how we need to see it. And this is where the concentration of human lives are in the city. So it's a huge deal. So overall, I think, and the last area is research and development, and it's a review of the disaster response mechanism and analysis. So what are the disaster response mechanisms that we currently have in the country? And how do we actually look at these through a climate lens, and how do we maximize and improve these areas? So those are just some of the projects that we're working on. Now, the question I have from you, maybe I ask you this. Can I have a volunteer? There's a lot of people in the room. I'm sure if somebody was... Can I have a volunteer, please? Again, I say a volunteer. Thank you very, very much. I want you to come and stand next to me. No. I want to give you this and say thank you for volunteering.
Thank you.
And I want to ask you, why did you volunteer?
Because I hate the awkwardness of no one else coming up. So I wanted to show up and yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's for you, and I owe you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So why did we do that? Why did we do that? Because in our minds, I want you guys to show up as a youth. In our minds, we think, oh no, if we volunteer, we're going to be, you're always thinking about the bad side of it. When you put yourself out there, you need to be present, you need to show up, And it's not always bad. So that's a big expectation from you guys. So bring your innovation hats, show up, and expect to make a change. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, that was a bit scary. There's a young person. It's not easy to volunteer for things you don't want to think about. Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. I think Mandy's presentation started off by scaring us a little bit there, by saying people are dying. I don't know if Mandy expects us to go and live on houseboats. Not sure how well some of us will fare there, but there's a lot of work going into how we adapt to the impacts of climate change. And I would like to now open the conversation, and we can open this up by posing a few questions then to you about how do you think, or what do you think is missing from the PCC's focus, and what would you like to see more of with the work that we're doing, and how do you think we can better engage with the youth? One of the things that we're trying to do with part one of this event is we recognize the fact that some of the people who are here are only here because a family member or a friend has, answered this call for an essay, and they're actually engaging with the PCC for the very first time. And now that you know what we do within the PCC, what would you like to see more of? Some of you are hearing about the just transition for the first time, and you're getting to hear about the effects of climate change for the first time. Maybe you weren't taking it seriously enough. So we would like to hear from you. If you have any questions for our speakers, you're welcome to pose those questions through me, of course. I see 5 hands. I'm seeing 6 hands now, 7 hands, 8 hands, 9. Okay, so we will take 3 hands first. I know Shamila has to dash off, so we will start with her. And then we will come to Begitemba, and then we go to Matsidiso. Yes.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the speakers for their very insightful presentations. And I'm also one of those people who want the presentation. So what we often see in the policy space, and I think a lot of the PCC's work also revolves around informing that, is that young people are often involved in the consultation process. And I don't think it's a PCC thing only. I think it's a governmental thing in general, where we don't really understand our role in the implementation. And sometimes when you look at action plans, you always have stakeholders listed or identified that would support the implementation of specific actions. But it's very rare that you actually see young people being listed there. And the reason why that is important is because when you're already identified in the action plan, that kind of enables, that sort of support for young people to be involved in that process. Because if it's non-existent, it doesn't usually take place, it doesn't usually happen. But I think even in the work that I do in the youth space, and we talk about young people's involvement in policy making, I think we are always able to say that we can contribute to this in the consultation. But when we are asking them, so how do you get involved in the implementation thereof, the responses are very limited. So I think for the PCC, for government in general, I think it's very important to highlight young people's role in implementation, because we all come from different sectors, they have specific skills. Even as organizations, I think Mr. Manali mentioned a couple of things that we can support in the campaign. And I think we want to hear more about that instead of us, because we always said, take a seat at the table, take a seat at the table. But can you give us a break sometimes and tell us how we can support as well? So I think that was just my comment. Like I said, I need to dash, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Shamila. Peggy Temba.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the speakers. Currently, we're in a period of transition. I think 60+ democracies will be convening elections, including that of South Africa. So we know that the international climate might change internationally with those democracies. And also South Africa will get its 7th administration. We know that the PCC was an executive initiative. So my question is, in the line of mitigation, what is it that the PPC has, planned to make sure that we retain some of the progress that we've made with the 6th administration, but also how do we make sure that we're able to engage with the international community, because maybe the United States might retain that other president. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy Temba. Matsiriso.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the speakers. I thought that it was very insightful to like the way that you explained some of the PCC's work. So my question, I think it's mostly about the unemployment, tackling that, but just in general, the approach of the PCC is what kind of considerations have been made regarding gender and gender equality? Because so I grew up in the coal belt, and one of the things like this whole JP and the consultations are a hot topic, but it just seems like, especially with employment, because most of the people who work in coal mines are men, I think like overwhelmingly so, it seems that they are most represented in conversations about shaping the future of employment in those areas. And so, but then often what gets overlooked are the women who mostly participate through the informal economy or supporting coal mines and those existing communities. So yeah, I just wanted to ask like what considerations have been made, particularly for like creating employment opportunities and what the future would be for women in those spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiri. I think we can start off with the mitigation question from Peggy Temba. Simpiwe, if you can address that one.
Okay, sure. My mic is on. I will try and do your question justice in terms of, I guess it's about continuity of the work that we've done as the PCC and even the global just climate change space, especially with regards to the US. So with the work that we have been doing, that's why it's so important for us to actually make sure that we build relationships and capacitate decision makers that are sitting within the different organizations, and so that they can use the research to continue the work in terms of climate change mitigation or adaptation. So that enables continuity if we do have the right policies and are working towards the right policies. But with regards to the role of the PCC, the climate change bill was approved by National Assembly last year. It's October, if I get my dates correct, and it is in the process of being promulgated. So what that essentially means is that the PCC is now on its path to being a legal entity, and which means that we now will become a government organization and exist beyond beyond the elections. And so the PCC will continue its work beyond the elections. But if I may, I would like to ask Blessing to come in, because Blessing is really has more political insight and in depth in terms of that particular process. So Blessing, if I end up saying through you, I would like Blessing to come in, because I think he'd add value to that. Blessing, can you please just in terms of the the politics and the PCC in the future?
Seems to be reluctant.
I'm saying, colleagues, that is coming through into the act. I think primarily it has excluded ministers. So the next commission will not have ministers, which means that you have to invite them into the space of the commission and assume that they will have issues, firstly in relation to their portfolio and whether they see the commission as an adversary or not. Because they are no more. So, but because we are not a constitutional commission, we would never have the summoning powers. So we're going to really rely on the consensus and the political will of government to continuously support the commission. But at a broader level, you also got the bill mandating all tiers of government to do certain things. Local government, provincial, but I think specifically it calls on them to do climate response strategies. Now, the problem is not to try to do strategies to allow malicious compliance as a tick box exercise. So you're going to end up with all the 262, I don't know how many there are now municipalities, all of them doing climate. The cities would do it because they have their budget and the nature of their programs. And some of them are actually energy operators. So the metros might do it, but you don't expect a municipality called Kalawatsa in the Northwest to do climate change. But that we're going to have to do a lot of political work with councillors and with the mayors, particularly the hotspots in the Northern Cape, in Northwest, in Limpopo, and in KZN and Mpumalanga to make sure that remains. But only do that, you've got to infuse the work of the PCC into their normal engagement. So don't have a separate inclusion and a separate stakeholder engagement strategy, a stakeholder engagement process, but also don't discuss just transition and we discuss potholes. But that might be the only space where they've got access to the political powers that be. So we have a very, very vast environment that would have to manage. But that is political from 5 months ago. So I don't know how things have changed in the country. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Tabiseng, for allowing that and listening. And just in closing, I do want to acknowledge that we are in a period of transition, even internationally. So things like the Inflation Reduction Act in the USA that were promulgated, where you see incentives and financing on initiatives that support the transition versus carbon tax could be at risk, but we continue to monitor that and see how it might affect us as a country as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Simpiwe. So most of the people that you will see at this event have had some role to play in the Youth Perspective series. And I like the question from Matshidiso because I mentored Matshidiso through her essay, which has a gender focus. But to you then, Zimasa, particularly, from Mpumalanga, highlighting some of the work that we're doing through the partnership implementation model, the gender lens, how is that coming through? How are we ensuring that we amplify, gender within that work? And also to Shamila's question, how are we ensuring that we're embedding young people's participation in implementation?
Okay. Thank you, Tabiseng. So maybe firstly, let me start by saying, Matshidiso, that from the PCC side, our position is that gender responsiveness or taking the gender lens is everybody's responsibility. It is not only the job or the role of women. So our position is that gender be mainstreamed across the board. So not only in terms of job creation, but all of the PCC line functions. So of course, this can never be enough. There's so much for us to do in this space because women are quite a vulnerable group, not only from the PCC's perspective, but also at the country level. That's one aspect. Now moving to the partnership implementation model. So what we have seen in terms of our engagements with women, we of course want to bring on board, or in the process of bringing on board, local women or local female groups that is quite a challenge for us in that NGOs that drive the gender perspective, the local ones now I mean, within the Coal Belt, are informally structured. So many of them don't even have a digital presence, so it's hard to reach them. So this, of course, means that there's a great deal of capacity building that is required for these respective organizations. So what we've done to reach those groups is work closely with the local municipalities, because they would better understand the local dynamics, and so they would have closer relationships with those local groups in their respective municipalities or in their respective towns. So one of the forums that we are in the process of establishing is the community forum. That's where we are envisioning the role of vulnerable groups to be voiced. The thing is, when you spoke, you indicated a lot of the work is focused on the obvious stakeholders, the labor unions and the likes. But in actual fact, it's the women who are most impacted with this energy transition because they are the most vulnerable. So we're seeing a role for them there. And where we'd want women and youth to come in particularly quite strong is in the identification of those bankable projects. But most importantly, our view is that also the livelihood projects, because those are the ones that are really targeted at the informal economy. And that's, of course, where we see over-representation of women in those disenfranchised spaces. So what we are working on doing is increasing incomes, or our intention is to increase incomes through that pipeline of livelihood projects. So that's how we have structured the project to include women. But at the same time, and as much as I say that we will include the vulnerable groups in the community forum, I mean, we can't have a situation where women are speaking to just women or the communities. It's the segregation of the stakeholder groups. That's why we then established the integrated forum, which then will bring in all stakeholders, because gender responsive planning is, of course, everybody's responsibility, and that's a key priority for us. We are trying, but of course, it is never enough if you look at the South African landscape. So much more must be done in terms of gender budgeting. We need to go beyond just mainstreaming gender responsiveness.
There was also a question about youth in particular and how we embed the youth in implementation. You've partially answered that, but that was particularly on gender. How are we then going to ensure that, you know, youth is not just brought in at a conceptual stage, but we actually planning for youth to be the implementers of these projects?
All right, thanks. Thank you, Ntabi. So our approach with youth is very similar to our approach to women as a collective vulnerable group. But from how we see things is that the development of that project pipeline of the bankable projects and the livelihood projects, that is not something that the PCC can do on its own. So our intention is to have implementing partners for those projects. And then, of course, the implementing partners would be either youth, it could be business, it would depend given the projects that are identified. So in terms of the partnership implementation model, we were quite intentional in not coming with, so here's the pipeline of projects. Now you pick what is your input here, but rather thought, let's bring people together and have an empty, what is it called? Empty board where people determine for themselves how they see their communities or how they want their communities to be economically diversified. So we thought that that would be a best approach, particularly bringing on board youth and, of course, women.
Thank you, Zimasa. There is another element to the employment strategy and economic diversification unit, which focuses on social ownership models. And we have a colleague here who's working on that work. But I'm interested to know then, I might be a bit biased here, but gender. Inclusion of women in renewable energies.
Hi, I'm Tavi Singh. So maybe just to add to what Zimasa has also shared, maybe just to introduce myself, I should probably have started there. I'm Lindy Wade Johnson, and I'm also part of the employment strategy unit, and I focus primarily on skills development and also work on some of the economic diversification work. So we are actually conducting quite a bit of work to understand the shifts in the labor market, and also to do quite a bit of work to understand what are some of the skills gaps that are emerging within the shifting labor market. And in all of that, we are also pulling through some of the understanding of what are the gender dynamics in the various in those various spaces, but also how do we then effectively start planning better to better incorporate vulnerable groups, looking at disability, but also females as well. We are also then doing an additional piece of work that will look at social protection mechanisms, and this is, I think this piece of work is actually quite critical to the just transition, because there will be people that will be left behind, and how do we effectively deal and make provisions for those left behind. So we will also then be doing some cost analysis around what does that actually cost us as a country on also start identifying what they look like and how they should be implemented. So through these three pieces of work, gender is a key focus to ensure that we are not basically doing the same thing as our forefathers did. So it is really, it's a theme that's been pulling through. So just on the renewables front, the skills development portion will also, there's a big part of it that will look at the energy sector, but we are also focusing on other sectors that are also quite, that are vulnerable sectors highlighted in the Just Transition Framework. So we will start looking at the whole Just Transition Framework and those key sectors that are then quite vulnerable, and how do we then make sure that gender is a key theme that runs through all of them.
Maybe Tabi, if I can conclude on this matter before you kill me. I think, of course, what Lindy and I are saying is that this is all a work in progress. Where we'd want to see the PCC going is, in actual fact, have a specific unit dedicated to vulnerable groups, particularly women and the youth. And as much as we feel like the mainstreaming of vulnerable groups across all units is good, it's critical, but where we'd want to see the PCC go is to have a dedicated unit driving that agenda. That's the future that we would like to see.
Thanks. I think that's part of Zimasa's coup d'etat. I'll take more questions. I believe we had a hand from Tandiwe. And then we will take Mpendulo. I see Ntabiseng has left the room. Then we will go to William. Yes.
Okay, hi ladies. Thank you for the lovely presentations. I just wanted to ask, I heard the first lady with the green, okay, I forgot your name, sorry. You mentioned something about having challenges with access to education, especially in the STEM related fields. Where is the challenge exactly? And have you also engaged with all stakeholders, including like universities, schools, and all of that? I just wanted to know more about it.
Thank you, Tandiwe. Pendulo.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, ladies, for the presentations. My question is around the socio-economic work. First of all, I'd like to know where in other regions have you looked in terms of the socio-economic work? Because I'm hearing that most of the focus is in Mpumalanga, and in my view, Mpumalanga may be a source area in terms of climate change, but not necessarily where some impacts actually affecting the areas. For example, we have Eastern Cape that had droughts, Western Cape droughts, KZN floods. Do you guys look into those and also see how you can bring about perspectives of the just transitions, or is the focus just on Mpumalanga? Thanks.
William?
Hello, everyone. I want to touch on the issue of gender. What I was gonna say is that looking at this room, I'm more worried about the men, because I see a lot of women leaders, but very few men, even for the essays. So I was going to say, and here are very educated women. So what is it that you're going to do to make sure that you also reach out to those women that are less educated, so that they can also come to the front? And then the other thing is about innovation. How is it that you're going to make it more accessible? For example, in terms of adaptation and mitigation, issues of, since there's a shortage of water, we need to save water. But here in Joburg and Pretoria, methods of maybe reporting issues of water getting wasted, damaged pipes, the methods are very efficient and very effective, but back home where I'm from, you find that more water is getting wasted. So how is it that you're going to tackle making innovation more accessible, so that we can make a difference and go forward at everyone all at once?
Thank you. I would like to direct some of these questions to Mandy from our adaptation unit. We also have a question online from Gosnati Ngambule, who is asking, in your opinion, does our country have adaptation plans and capacity on infrastructure to predict the impacts of climate change in our societies? I think oftentimes when we talk about gender, we like to speak about it through an adaptation lens. And it's always looking at the impacts of climate change on women, especially in communities like KZN and Gqeberha. Maybe Mandy can speak to some of the work that we're doing there, and also touch on the climate resilience development strategy work in Nelson Mandela Bay.
Sorry, Ntabiseng, can I please just ask if you could repeat the question that was online?
The online question is on plans and capacity on infrastructure to predict the impacts of climate change in society.
So some of the work we're doing in one of the areas in the research and development area is that we are actually looking at early warning systems and understanding what early warning systems we have currently in South Africa, and how do we how it functions and how do we optimize that and make it more effective. In the infrastructure space, I think with new technologies that are coming through, there are currently a lot of technologies are coming through, but we are struggling a little bit in terms of awareness and getting these passed through, the different areas so that they can be used by the engineers. And it has to be an incentive. It's either the carrot or the stick. You find that, yes, there might be a technology that's easier to put up. It's might reduce water, but the engineers don't want to use it because it's not something they've used before. So we have to make those technologies, we have to mainstream them much quicker and understand how they actually operate and how efficient they are in the built environment. I think in terms of that, in the infrastructure space, there's a lot of opportunities. We are also currently, if you look at Africa, you look at South Africa, we're in a different situation to Europe, where Europe is retrofitting. We have the opportunity to piggyback on what they've done, although the environments might not be the same, but we are going to build anew in many instances. So we have that opportunity, and we need to look at the planning perspective and integrate optimization in all of the buildings and those kind of mechanisms to be able to safeguard and future-proof the infrastructure that we build. In terms of Nelson Mandela Bay, I think the reason we chose that project was multiple, and it is that strategic framework that we're looking at that I talked about. I do know there was a question on, are we only focusing on Mpumalanga in terms of the socioeconomic stuff? And I do know that Lindiwe is working on some stuff in Nelson Mandela Bay as well. But this project, we chose the Nelson Mandela Bay because it's important for the South African economy. It has gone through a drought. It has ports, 2 ports, so that it's accessible. So it's got a very biodiverse region. So there are huge opportunities and risks in the region. So we thought, let us work on this as a pilot. We're using a local team, which means that the expectation is that the local knowledge that's coming to the table is going to be quite valuable. And we're going to roll this out to be able to understand what the risks and opportunities are and which sectors we target. And if I can give you some examples of the areas that have been chosen, I mean, the report hasn't been released yet, but what are they looking at is, for instance, if you look at the infrastructure, they've labeled it different colors. So the first one is, they talk about purple infrastructure. How do we effectively adapt and optimize infrastructure? They talk about the green lungs, because there's the ecological side, the terrestrial ecological side of Nelson Mandela Bay. They talk about the blue lungs, which is now the ocean ecosystems and how that actually affects the Nelson Mandela Bay area. And they talk about the golden beaches. How do we bring in tourism there? So there's a number of aspects we're looking at, and we'll further look at that to see what opportunities and the risks are there, and then further go down that route and look at how do we actually bring in gender, how do we bring in business cases to actually achieve those opportunities and reduce the risks in those areas. Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks, Mandy. The question on education, access to education, I'd like to give that to Zimasa, since you guys are doing a lot of work with universities in the space, having had a dialogue with the University of Mpumalanga. Interesting that you then turn around and say that there's an issue with accessing STEM careers. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
Thank you, Ntabi. When did we have our dialogue with the University of Mpumalanga? January sometime, 22nd, I think. So the issue with access into STEM, I think at the broad level, Tandiwe, of course, the costs of education, that is critical for everybody. But I think most importantly, not enough women are getting into STEM. Now, therein lies our problem, because the opportunities of the just transition or the energy transition lies in innovation, in technology. So that means then if we're not getting enough women if we don't have enough women getting into STEM at university level, that's because there's a problem with our basic education system. That then means we will not be, well, I say we because myself, I'm also a woman, we will not get the benefits of, the full benefits after the transition because we're not getting into innovation, we're not getting into technology. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that you're saying that not enough women are getting into STEM, yet William can only see women in the rooms. The contrast between those two statements. We'll take the last set of questions. I remember there were, now there's 5 hands now. From what I remember, we had a hand from Masego. Nosipa, I'm not sure if you also wanted, no. No. I'm not taking Jodi's hand again. I want to give new people an opportunity now. We'll take, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I'll get to know you in the session after this. We'll take the lady over there. Yes. But we'll start with Masego.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masego Mokhwezi, and I am a Climate Action and Coordination intern at CAAP. So I would just like to pose a suggestion, and this could be a possible call for collaboration. So I would like to see the PCC focusing on building capacity with local small-scale farmers. And because Zimasa specifically mentioned that there isn't enough implementation on the ground, and I would also like to see the PCC upskilling and reskilling young people in rural areas within the agricultural and farming sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Masego. The next question. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tabitha from Rainsburg. Today I'm representing C40 Cities Youth Hub. Can you guys hear me? The question I'd like to pose is mainly around the vulnerable communities you guys have identified and their access to the research that you've done. I just wanted to know if they have any participation in these researches and plans in projects that you intend on implementing, and also their access to the awareness and their education access to the just transition, because I feel that there's a lot of hot topics going around on social media and not a lot of these vulnerabilities have access to that. Do they actually know what's happening? Because they are subject matters of a lot of these researchers, and how you intend on empowering their voices, because they are a pivotal contribution to most of what is happening. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next question from our eager volunteer, Tando.
Thanks, Ntabi Singh, and thanks everyone for the presentations. I think my question is across the board, so I want to find out what tangible lessons are we learning and taking away from Mpumalanga since its focus that can be replicated or avoided in other provinces and communities that are dependent on mining and minerals and that require much needed diversification. Thanks.
Thank you, Tando. I think Yuri had touched on, some of the lessons that we've learned from the Komati decommissioning and repurposing project. But we are applying some of those lessons across the board in all our projects with the hope that we don't leave as many people behind, at least. And then on the community participation, I think it's important that we recognize that the PCC is a multi-stakeholder body And some of our stakeholders include community groups that we work with that are actually doing the work on the ground. And they are the people who are responsible for implementation, or at least capacitating members of the community on the just transition. So it cannot be left solely to one organization. But I think my team members can further elaborate on their specific projects, how they're bringing in, that community participation. I think Zamata can take the question on capacity building for farmers and reskilling them, seeing that that's one of the areas, or at least agriculture is one of the areas that's been identified through, this process of developing an employment strategy in the short term from Mpumalanga.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So I think it was Maseko Makwezi. That was her question. So I liked your call to the PCC, asking us to focus more on capacity building for various stakeholders, but yours was specifically for farmers or within the agricultural sector. In terms of the employment strategy or the Mpumalanga employment opportunities research, agriculture is identified as a key sector. It's within the existing, so expanding the existing industries, Maseko. So, of course, with that work, as we go into the deep dive, getting a better understanding of that sector, a key component of that is for government to create an enabling environment for local farmers or the agricultural sector. So for us, that would, of course, include capacity building of local farmers. That is not something that the PCC can do on its own, but it's important for the PCC to be that catalyst for the relevant stakeholders, both in the public and the private sector, to drive that. Capacity building is everybody's responsibility, specifically for that sector. So ours would then be to catalyze stakeholders to provide that support. So definitely we appreciate that's very key for us. Thank you, Maseko.
Mandy, also on the participation of communities and how we're embedding them in our projects.
So it's not particularly that one. I think that when we've covered from my side, I don't think I would be able to add any much more. But what I do want to say is on the agricultural side, I think we need to remember that PCC is not an implementation agent. We do facilitate this. One of the sector reports that Dumisani is going to be engaged on is in the agricultural sector, and there will be dialogues. So I think, and all the people that count will be sitting at the table. So I think voices like yourself, Maseko, that need to be heard, and bringing those kind of opportunities and risks to the table is something that we need. So please do keep an eye out for those dialogues that should be happening soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. If there aren't any more questions, I would like for us to now break for tea. And then we can continue with the second part of this engagement. But I hope that those of you who are joining us for the first time, now you know what's going on in the PCC, and I would like to encourage you to get in contact with us, because most of the relationships that we have, especially with the youth, have been through such engagements where somebody just has a light bulb moment, and then we get to hear them out, and then we take a particular project forward. So we do have an email address where you can contact us. That's info@climatecommission.co.za. .org.za. Sorry. As the person who's the custodian for the PCC website, I really shouldn't be getting that wrong.
Okay, everybody makes mistakes. It's fine.
But thank you very much. The engagement has been great. In the next part, I would like to hand over to my colleague, who's now at C40, but used to be at the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project, or at least a representative of it, through her work at WWF, and that is Klengiwe. She's also one of the mentors in this program, but more than mentoring, she was part of the steering committee for this project, and the CAAP project has been with us from inception, from conceptualizing this idea with us, and we're really happy that the colleagues could join us as we launch this historic publication. And as Blessing had alluded to, you know, it's a very important year for us to be launching something like this, not just for the just transition, but because we are going into elections, hashtag the year of Dintswalo. With this being our 1994, it's important that we get the youth voices amplified, and we really take ownership of this just transition, because ultimately we're the ones who are going to be responsible for implementing the transition. So thank you very much. We can now break. Can we be back in the room at 5 exactly? Thank you.
Thank you, Ntavi. You've got a good memory. So who asked about other areas? I want to respond to them.
Bendula.
Go complete
The black suit.
Oh.
Hi, can you settle it down, please? Yes. All right. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Tlengwe Khatebe. I'm currently at C40 Cities as the Renewable Energy Technical Advisor, but my role here started when I was still at WWF South Africa as the Civil Society and Youth Engagement Officer. Thank you to everyone here in person and all those online that have continued to stay with us since we started. And thank you again to Ntabiseng for taking us through the first part of this event today. I feel like Ntabiseng should have continued, but we will rest that issue and discuss it another day. But thank you so much. I have had the privilege and honor of being part of the steering committee that put the SS idea together, and we've carried it through. It's been a while. In fact, the idea came through August 2022, if I'm not mistaken, and now we're in March 2024. So it's been quite a small journey, but we are happy that you are finally here today. Just a brief background about the Youth Perspective series is that we came together, and I think what had happened that year in 2022 is that there was an expert series that was written, and mostly it was more the older generation that had submitted, except I was one of those. Just saying, if you open the booklet there, you see my face there. Just I apologize. So we were like, we actually, and it was quite academic. The first essays were quite academic, and there weren't as many young people as well that were involved in there. So we thought, let's have a youth series essays that are written by young people with their own perspective. So we're not aiming for expert essays here. We're aiming to hear the voices of young people. And what you will get to see and read through the essays is the voices of young people and what they think about the just transition in the various topics as well. And I will highlight some of the topics that came through the essays. So these are really a short series of essays written by young people between the ages of 18 and 35, and they aim to advance just transition and climate action in South Africa. We had a call. We put out a call in February last year, 2023, with about 90 young people submit their abstracts, and in the end, well done to all the 14 that were selected, and 15 essays that were selected and have written their essays. I think it really takes a lot. The 90 that abstract that you received were quite good, and it just to finally make it to the 15 is truly amazing. And I hope that you give yourselves props for that, and congratulations. And the essays that were selected draw on the lessons from the youth, lessons the youth have learned and opinions they have drawn from their first-hand experiences and research. So in the essays, I just want to highlight some of the topics that came through. Young people, I think we had some of the questions around education. So a lot of the essays touch around education, being the generation of technology and social media. There are essays that touch on misinformation, waste management, technology and innovation, SMEs development, agriculture and mining. We had some of the questions there. Of course, global climate change, good governance, absolutely being the year that I hate this term that this is our year of 1994. So I feel like things are worse than you can't compare them right now. But either way, good governance, because we are the future leaders. Hopefully there's some future presidents sitting here. Special inequality, some of the other issues touched on renewables, climate finance, and women's health. So those are the topics that are highlighted in the essays. For those online, a link would be shared to the publication of the essays that you can access them there. For those here in person, you can scan the QR code and it will take you to the publication to see the essays. So just, I think before I call up on Ayaka, just I'm giving you some time to prepare yourself. I would like to acknowledge a few people that were really played a critical role in putting all this together. Firstly, the steering committee, which included Ntabiseng, Ignatius, you have seen him working around here, as well as Mr. As Ntabiseng calls him, that blessing, and Simpiwe, we were the team that were part of the steering committee that ensured that this process carried through. Oh, my apologies. Myself, as well as someone who's online, part of Gileadzi, she used to be at SICAN. We were part of the Climate Ambition to Accountability project. So this is the project steering committee that helped to put this together. And also, I would like to extend gratitude to some of to the mentors that helped the authors of the essays as well. And that goes to Mendi, Lindiwe, Kwezikazi, and Zimasi were quite critical in being mentors, in addition to the steering committee as well, that played a critical role. And lastly, I would like to acknowledge Gabriel Clausen from from African Climate Alliance, who also helped in evaluating all the essays that we received. So I think, yeah, a huge thank you to all the teams that helped put this together finally. Thank you so much. So I would like to hand over now to our keynote speaker. Really, please not be nervous. Our Ayaka Melitafa, who is the founder of the Ayaka Melitafa Foundation, the youngest commissioner on the Presidential Climate Commission in South Africa, and public representative of the African Climate Alliance, a youth-led climate advocacy group that organized the climate strike protest in Cape Town in collaboration with more than 1 million youths around the world. She's also a graduate of the Project 90 by 20 youth-led initiative. Ayaka is a recipient of the Charlotte Maya McGregor Institute's Women of First Award, was also nominated as one of South Africa's most powerful women by the Mail and Guardian in 2020, and one of 5 winners of the Matrix Antarctica program. It's a long bio. It's a very, very long bio. She's very accomplished, and she's representing us well in the PCC as the youth commissioner. In fact, if you have any issues that you want raised to the PCC, this is the person to contact. So I'll hand over to Ayaka for her keynote address. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, esteemed guests. My name is Ayaka Melitafa, a climate justice activist by passion, as well as the Youth Commissioner on the Presidential Climate Commission by profession. I am truly honored to be here today at this remarkable event organized by the Presidential Climate Commission, as we gather here to celebrate the power of youth voices and their invaluable contributions to South Africa's just transition and climate action. As I look around the room, I can't lie and say I see more women than men, because in honesty, I just see diversity. You know, this essay series has come a long way, and you've waited a long time to be here today. So it's quite amazing to see this room full of different faces from different walks of life coming together for a common goal. As we embark on this journey towards a sustainable future,
it is essential that we recognize the power and significance of young people participating in policy decisions. The Youth Perspective series, commissioned by the Presidential Climate Commission, stands as a testament to a belief that young voices hold the key to transformative change. I'm going to start with this quote that says, "Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world," by Utata Nelson Mandela. And this could not be more true for the climate movement. The climate movement was started by a young person just like us, Greta Thunberg. She was only 16 years old, but then through education that she got, whether in school, whether through an organization, whether just by herself going onto the internet, she found out about climate change and the adverse effects it has on young people and our future. Through her bravery, she was able to inspire millions of young people all around the world to stand up and mobilize against climate injustices in our countries. And this movement of more than 1 million young people all around the world has sparked conversations in policy where young people are actually actively engaged. As we sit here today, we are actually part of a conversation that contributes to our policies in South Africa. We see by actively involving young people in shaping climate policies, we tap into their creativity, passion, and fresh perspectives. The essays in the Youth Perspective series serve as a powerful reminder that the solutions we seek lie in the hearts and minds of our young people. They bring forth lessons learned from their own experiences and research, offering unique insights that drive our Just Transition implementation plan forward. Youth participation is not just about representation. It is about fostering a sense of ownership and empowerment. When young people are given a seat at the table, their ideas and concerns are heard, valued, and integrated into policy frameworks. This inclusive approach ensures that our decisions are not only effective, but also equitable, addressing the needs of those most affected first. The Youth Expert Series serves as a catalyst for change, inspiring collaboration and dialogue between generations. It sparks conversations that bridge the gap between policymakers and young activists and young professionals, and even just a young person living in South Africa not even aware about climate change. It fosters mutual understanding and shared responsibility among us as citizens in South Africa. So let us embrace the power of youth participation and recognize that their voices hold the potential to shape a future that is not only sustainable, but is also just and equitable for all. Together, we can create a world where every decision reflects the aspirations and needs of our youth, paving the way for a brighter tomorrow. As we come together to celebrate the work and dedication of the youth that are sitting right here at this table, we must not forget about the young people that we represent back home. I am sure that in our own communities, we have an array of young people looking up to us. I'm sure in your own communities, you're not just doing this because it was convenient for you. You were driven by a passion. You were driven by something that's only unique to you. Throughout this series, we will explore the intersection of science. Throughout this series, we explored the intersection of science, policy, and innovation, providing a comprehensive understanding of these challenges that we face and the opportunities that lie ahead. Our hope is that these essays will not only educate and inform, but also empower and mobilize young people to become agents of change in their own communities. As I know from firsthand experience, I am here because of a passion of mine. I was affected by climate change because my mom is a small-scale farmer in the Eastern Cape. And by the time there was day zero, there wasn't a lot of rain and it was a bit shaky in the Eastern Cape. But Black parents being Black parents, every time I called my mom and asked her how the farm was doing, if everything was going okay, she reassured me and my siblings that everything is just going according to plan and all I needed to do was focus on my studies. The devastation I felt in my heart when we went to go visit my mother for the holidays is something that I will never forget. A farm that was green and plush with crops and corn and spinach, animals I had known since a little girl running around the field were dying. These crops were dry and brown. and my mother could no longer hide the despair on her face as she saw us completely heartbroken. So I stand for climate change, or I fight against climate change because of a personal experience. And by me sharing my story and by joining environmental groups at school and environmental organizations, it only empowered me to use my voice more, to make sure that young people know what is lying ahead of them, and so that they don't get caught off guard like me and my family did. And just as my story inspired many young people like me in Cape Town and around the world, I am certain that your story will do the same. That's why I'm absolutely proud to be standing in front of you, giving you this keynote address and learning more about you and your individual journeys that led you to this one specific moment. So, as I end off, I want us to get ready to embark on a transformative journey of knowledge, inspiration, and action. Together, we can make profound impact and build a better world for future generations. Together, thank you so much for joining us in this noble endeavor. We are excited to have had you as part of the Youth Expert Series, and we are looking forward to see how you will grow your story and your passion to reach international levels. We are excited to see you be your own change makers, innovators, ministers, presidents, because I truly believe that South African youth can do it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ayaka. I think Ayaka has touched on her personal journey, and now in our next session, we're going to touch on the personal journey of the authors to hear why you responded to the call, to the abstract call. You can be honest. There was a price tag there. That's also okay. But before, I always have this issue. But before my previous manager gets angry with me, I would like to say the essay series was a partnership between the PCC and the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project. And that's a project that is a partnership between WWF South Africa, Climate Action Network South Africa, as well as the Institute of Economic Justice. So thank you to all these partners that were able to help us. And the CAAP project is funded by the European Union. So I would like to call 3 authors on stage, but I would like to say we're not limiting these questions and reflections to just the 3 authors that are going to be called here. We will open the floor to the rest of the authors to also help to answer some of the questions as well. So I'd like to call Kamanis Shazi on stage, Matsidiso Lingwasa, as well as Jody Frank Brown. While they come on stage, I'll just read a little bit about them. Please do join me on stage. Matsidiso is a public policy analyst serving as a budget researcher at Section 27. Here she advocates for budget policy and interventions that advance the constitutional rights to basic education and access to healthcare for all. Her advocacy is foregrounded by her Emelahleni upbringing, and through this work aims to advance budget policy decisions that improve service delivery in overlooked and underserviced communities in the country. Her particular focus areas are gender responsive budgeting and the utilization of physical policy to advance socio-economic rights in a climate change context. She currently serves on the steering committees of Budget Justice Coalition and Imali Yetu, and she forms part of the Fiscal Openness Accelerator Advisory Group for the National Treasury. She is the graduate of the University of Witwatersrand and University of Sussex, and is a Mandela Washington 2023 Fellow. I also have been joined by Jody Frank Brown. Jody is an environmental professional with a master's degree in environmental management and expertise in NGO and government sectors. For the past 8 years, Jody overarching mission has been to drive meaningful change for environmental sustainability and a climate resilient future. He specializes in coordinating and mainstreaming climate change responses across all spheres of society. He also brings hands-on experience in biodiversity offsets and protected area expansion projects. As an advocate for youth empowerment, he champions gender equality and youth involvement in environmental decision-making, where he also serves as the leadership and management fellow at the African Wildlife Foundation. And lastly, last but not least, we have Ngamani on stage. Ngamani. Oh, am I saying it wrong? Ngamani. Okay. Oh, okay. Apologies. Is a development practitioner and a professional planner registered with the South African Council for Planners. He has a master's degree in urban and regional planning and is currently pursuing a PhD in urban planning at Stellenbosch University. He is a programs manager at Funda Wande and serves as an embedded PhD researcher at Ranyaka Community Transformation through his partnership with the Center for Regional and Urban Innovation and Statistical Exploration at Stellenbosch University. Thank you so much, and I apologize for pronouncing your name wrong. So I have a few questions for you guys. I think the first one is that we put out the call in February last year. We didn't know who was going to respond. So why did you guys respond to the call to write the youth essays? So I'll start with you.
Can you hear me? That's fine. Okay, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about this journey. I think all of us who've been part of it know it's been actually like quite a long journey, and it's actually been a year since we started. And for me, the reason why I decided to apply for this is because I keep mentioning it. I mentioned in my bio and earlier, but I'm from Emalahleni Witbank, just like Tan, you were in the room. And I think that with our experiencing there, even though I have very fond memories growing up, and it's a place that's very close to my heart, and the communities there, but I can't lie and say that the quality of life is always great. There's some things that are normalized, that are caused by environmental degradation. We generally don't drink the tap water, and it's just an accepted thing, and we normalize it until you get to Johannesburg. When I moved here for university, I was like, oh, there's so many things that I didn't realize that we just make do without. And then specifically, well, now recently there's just been the conversation about the just energy transition, and there's so much conversation around it. And in fact, somebody, I read an article from someone who had, someone that I knew had written an article about climate change and in Emalahleni in Witbank, and wasn't actually from there and had never been there, which is okay, but then kind of pretended to have. And so the insights were not completely accurate to what was happening. And so I just thought, while people are telling the story of where I come from, maybe it's about time people who are actually affected actually tell their story. So that's why I decided to apply for this.
Thank you so much. Jody?
Thank you. Very interesting question. So for me personally, I'd like to think that as an environmental professional, number one, that I feel it's a calling. So it's something that speaks to my heart, speaks to my soul. And when I saw the opportunity, when I saw the call, for me, it spoke directly to me. Where often you mentioned yourself, you contributed an essay, it was due to your position. We go via the route of technical expertise, what level hierarchies, etc., etc. But this was asking me, Jody, Frank Brown, what is your experience? So how often do we have young people in our country that maybe aren't as privileged as me, who have a position in the environmental space? How are we hearing their voices? And for me, this just presented a very unique opportunity to say, let me speak about my lived experience. Let me speak about the experiences of the people in my community, where these types of things often don't get considered. How do we incorporate these diverse perspectives into things? And I think what was also incredibly powerful about this opportunity, I think it was Ntabi Singh that mentioned earlier, Young people are led, but young people are also leaders. We have capacity in ourselves, and it spoke directly to us as young people, saying, do you know what? You have value. You have expertise in whatever life experiences you have. Let us learn your story beyond what you do for a living. And I think that was quite powerful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And money, yes. And why did you decide to answer?
I think firstly, I want to acknowledge my co-author, Sylvia. She's sitting here. We wrote our piece together, and it stemmed from, so Sylvia and I are former colleagues. We worked for a prominent dialogue institution. And during the course of 2022, we had been running a number of dialogues across the country on a range of issues, from youth unemployment to the role of young people in the economy, and at some point we're discussing the issue of, the contribution of young people, and particularly adding the voice of the Global South to the conversation around the just transition. And what actually a just transition is, and what it means for us as young people in South Africa. And so when the call came, it came at a point where we had been sharing a bunch of concept notes between the two of us, and some of them were just not landing at the right level with some of the senior youth in our organization. And so this was a platform for us to really push an idea we believe in understanding that the Global South has been a region of the world where solutions have been proffered to us constantly. It's always, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's never a question of how are you doing it? What's our understanding? What's our contribution to the space? And how do we want to make a transition that's just and is meaningful to us? And so those are some of the things we passed on in our article. It was also an opportune moment in the sense that the voice of young people when it comes to climate change and climate justice matters is most often a tokenistic approach to participation, where young people are called in to bring in their submissions, their thoughts, and it ends there. But there's never a concept of what happens beyond those submissions. And so we draw on some of the parallels from the Fees Must Fall movement, which we're both involved in with this peak. And we saw what a movement like that did for education in South Africa, not only in South Africa, but also how it infiltrated other movements throughout the continent and showed young people that your voice really matters. If you come together, you can do something. And that was part of the inspiration behind the article. I also think it didn't help that there was a price attached to it. We know the state of our economy. You can never do wrong without, a few rands being added to your bank account. So I think it was that dual motivation of us wanting to contribute our voice to the space, but also the fact that there was, an economic remuneration at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, because as you said, youth tokenism is that we didn't want just to have youth contribute and we take the ideas, but actually wanted to acknowledge them in some way. Often young people are just used to get information from, but aren't actually remunerated for their ideas as well. So we're trying to avoid that. So I think it's great that helped as well. Next question, I think I'll go to you, Matidio. So your essay, what does it talk about? I have feelings around gender, but what does it talk about, and why that particular topic as well? Yeah.
Well, you were correct. My essay is obviously about gender, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, because I think in the space that I'm in, which is like fiscal policy, so with the budget space, it's quite surprisingly quite dominated, like a male space. And so often when I go to like meetings with National Treasury, I'm like the only woman, or I'll be like the only young person. And if I bring up something of like education or health, I remember the response was, oh, we didn't actually think about how this will impact people, because I think they're still seen, like those areas are still seen as like women's work because of our unequal gender norms in the country. And so it means that sometimes the perspectives of women and young women are overlooked in our policy. And so every time I get an opportunity to talk about that, I think it's very important. And I take it, especially with the JETP and all the climate work that we're doing as a country, like it's all welcomed, but if it entrenches the gender inequalities that we've had for so many years, well, not just gender, but also like the racial, the class inequalities, we'll just end up living like, yes, maybe we might solve the problem and like mitigate and adapt, but we'll still have the same issues that we have today. And I just want to, in my own little way, like contribute to shifting that so that we can actually create like, so we can have a genuinely just transition and like, and realize that like for all people, including marginalized groups like young Black women.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's often really tough when you get to rooms and you're outnumbered. Someone mentioned that there were a lot of women here. It really is like that in most rooms, truly. Jody, over to you. Why the particular essay you wrote? What sort of message are you hoping that we receive as we read your essay? Yeah.
Thank you. So maybe just a quick question for the audience and maybe to whoever's online. So you can raise your hand or not, but how many of us in the room have maybe at some point in our lives traveled over an hour to go study or to go to work? Right? Most of the people in this room, how many of us live far away from where we work because we have to commute that distance? Right, so right here, this is what my essay was aiming to target. We have a huge amount of spatial inequality in South Africa, where our people are located, where they are located in relation to opportunities for livelihood, for basic necessities, right? And now I'm sure I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands again, but many of us most likely take a private car because we don't want to take multiple forms of public transport. And this adds to emissions, adding to climate change, which is a problem. Now, often in the climate change space, we get told, how can we deal with climate change? We have more urgent issues like poverty, etc., service delivery, right? But what we don't see is that our responses to climate change are actually integrated into the needs of our people. And this is really what I try to push in my essay. How do we integrate transport? How do we make spatial planning more efficient so that people can be located closer to the places that they need to be? How do we make public transport more effective? You know, these are all very important factors, and together we can ultimately reduce our carbon footprints of the transport sector, which is actually the second highest footprint of emissions within our country. So that is really the big scope, and really also acknowledging that this is embedded in an apartheid legacy. You know, so how are we bringing our people outside of the circumstances that they've been entrenched in for years? And that in itself is linked to our movements in climate change, which speaks to the efforts of the just transition of procedural justice, but also restorative justice. And that's really what I try to push in my essay.
Thank you so much, Jody. I must say that hearing the speakers here, they speak with such passion about their topic is really inspiring. Ngamani, I think over to you. Like, what was the message? Ngamani and Sylvia are the only ones that actually collaborated in their essay, which is amazing. But what was the message that you were putting forward for young people, and what are you hoping? So the not so youth people receive from your essay? What message are you hoping that they get from your essays? Yeah,
I think the big thing for our article was how the politics of development globally have, like I said, have really focused on when looking at the global south at least, they'll really focus on a kind of neocolonialism that puts people of the global south at a disadvantage more often than not. We argue in some parts of our article that the guns and the violence of the past have been really replaced by the policies and the funding mechanisms that on face value seem like they're trying to help developmental states, but in reality, they are attaching them to much more debt, they're attaching them to much more decisions that don't really favor them in the long term. And so what we're trying to say, our question really, or rather our article is an appeal to say, as we think about the just transition, as we think about development in the context of the global south, how are we making sure that the African voice and the voices of those who have been disadvantaged for such a long period of time actually come out stronger? The relationship of Africans with nature, with the land, with the earth throughout history have been brilliant. We haven't really had a problem, but it's only when the big machines of the industrialization, of the different phases of development that came with colonialism, we start to see the impacts really start to affect the African people more. And as a result, if you check the people who are most affected by the impacts of climate change are normally the poor people. You go to KZN in the Eastern Cape with the droughts and the flooding recently. The people who are most affected were the poorest of the poor. And the reason for that is because of, in part, the developmental planning landscape of South Africa that allows people to construct houses on riverbanks, the inaccess to financing, to access land, to access adequate housing, to access jobs. The reason why people stay in informal settlements, and the shack fires in Cape Town, the flooding that took place in many parts of this country really affected the poorest of the poor. So in our argument, we're saying that how can we take a pro-poor lens to the just transition? To not only speak about it and say, oh, well, here's a loan from the World Trade Organization or from whoever, or here's renewable energy materials from Germany, let's start to plant, but let's really look at how is this going to affect our people? Because in as much as the countries of the global north have moved way ahead of us in terms of their just transition, they're talking about the access to internet. To them, for example, their struggles are access to internet, access to more efficient technologies. But in our context, we still have people who have access to housing, access to electricity, access to clean drinking water. So our challenges are not really the same, and therefore we cannot have a just transition that is based off the lens of those who are already developed, who were developed, by the way, at our expense. But how do we make sure that we do not allow ourselves as the global south to be colonized again under the pretense of us being assisted? So that's really what we argue for in our article. That's what we're trying to push across, to say, as we think about this just transition, let's think about ourselves first before thinking about transitioning.
Absolutely. Thank you. I would, before I pose closing remarks from you guys, I would like to pose to the, if anyone of the authors would like to share their journey of submitting the abstract and what motivated them and the look about the essays. If anyone is interested, really would love to hear from you. Yes, please go ahead, Sylvia.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Kamani, for walking the journey with me. I don't think I want to add much to what Kamani has already shared. He's really captured it quite well. Perhaps my question is to the Commission and their vision for this series. What happens afterwards? So now we have this publication, we've reached this point, and you've really brought together an amazing group of young people that have fresh, innovative ideas. But what happens beyond this point? What are we then going to do now that we've come to the point of this publication and had this dialogue? Thank you.
My closing remarks question was going to be what next for you. So while I give Tabisang 2 minutes to think about what happens next. Sylvia, what next? What would you like to see happen next, actually?
Like I said, I think we built quite a good momentum. The bringing together of this grouping, I don't think was by mistake. It was quite intentional. So by keeping it together, keeping it as a community of practice of sorts, that can tap into each other. If there are actual tangible projects that people are working on, share that kind of information so that the resources amongst us can continue to be pushed forward. So not have it turn into something that will just sit on the shelf of the Commission, but an active platform of engagement and support, and turning it into an actual community of practice, I think would be a good start.
Thank you so much. Anyone else who would like to please go ahead. Please introduce yourself also. Yes.
Oh, I'm William. My essay, okay, the journey for me to write my essay was, I was thinking about the just transition when I saw the ad. But then I was thinking, this just transition, usually this sort of things help those people that already have the wealth, people who are going to invest in solar energy, people who are going to invest in solar panel generating companies. So what is it that is going to do for my neighbor that is paying exorbitant fees just to get to work each and every day for minibus taxis? How is it that the introduction of something like EVs is going to help someone like that? And then The other one was, I'm a student, I study online, load shedding. So how is it that this thing is going to help with those sort of things? Because it's obvious, they've already talked about how education is so important. But if the lack of electricity is taking from us that opportunity to earn that education, where are we standing? And then also the fact that we are blessed as a continent, because in terms of solar power, we are on the hottest and sunniest continent. How is that going to help with this transition? How is it that this is going to position us at the top, be one of the top collectors of solar power? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Nosipo, go ahead.
Thank you. My audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, and thank you so much everyone at the PCC. I think even having the opportunity to have your voice heard and voice recognized is just an incredible honor. More than anything, I'd say my essay was hugely inspired by two people who are here earlier on, that is my parents. So I was that kid that insisted my parents come. So more than anything, I have on my one side, my mother who works in diplomacy, and seeing her career really ignited my interest in global issues. But on the other end, I have my father who for many years has had a business that specializes in waste management. And throughout his career, his biggest focus is empowering young people in townships, but also working with huge organizations such as the ILO. So seeing how he goes into Bule Palale, Vela Vela, township areas, and gives advice and consultancy more than anything, I wanted to shed light on that. Because it's not every day that a young person who sees their parents' career trajectory and also wants to amplify their voice will have the opportunity to do so, and especially to do so in a way that combines both your writing, your creativity, and what you could offer in your story with informing policy. So when seeing the call for abstract, I thought it was an incredible opportunity and a wonderful way to add on to my frustration of writing essays for competitions that, you don't get the feedback you want to hear. So thank you once again to the PC.
All right. Thank you. Nolitando also like to share?
Thanks, everyone. I think on touching on why I chose this specific topic for the essay, is that when we go through the unemployment stats, you just see the stats on stats essay, and it's it just becomes a thing. 39%, 62% unemployed youth. It's an everyday thing. But I don't think there's anyone in this room that's never experienced what it's like to be unemployed, especially as young people, especially when you're applying or you're in that gap where you don't know what's going to happen next. And that's happening for young people around us every day. And I think what the essays required of us and what our mentors also asked of us is, what do the solutions look like? Don't just harbor on the challenges, because we know what the challenges are. So for us to speak to the solutions, and I think going to what Sylvia has said as well, let's see what the success stories look like. Let's see what the, if we're speaking about job creation and we're speaking about what the short-term impacts are and how we're getting that right. How do we replicate that work? How do we make sure that the statistics become positive conversations and not the scare tactics that are sometimes imposed on us? I think that's why I wrote this paper. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Niltando. I had the privilege of mentoring Peggy Temba and Yasira. So I'm going to put one of them on the spot to talk, because I actually, between the two of them, I haven't, Yasira, I think Peggy Temba spoke earlier. So I'll put Yasira on the spot to your journey of essay writing.
Thanks, Klingi. I regret having you as my mentor right now. So the question is, what is our experience in writing the essay?
Or
what did we write on?
Yeah, we can answer on either one of those, yeah.
Okay, so I approached my essay, I was doing in my professional environment, I was doing a lot of work on climate financing and really interrogating how the JET IP is really captured and motivated by the interests of corporate and also by market-based solutions to the problem. And often we find that the solutions to climate change aren't really profitable, and they don't, like the solutions that will actually work are not really profitable and won't benefit corporations if they're going to benefit people. So I took that work that I was doing and applied it to the same principle, but more from an adaptation lens. So when a crisis hits, how does our financing mechanisms for, say, water during a drought, how is it further impacted when there's this crisis? And that led me down the road to really showing how the strategies we use for how people pay for water, how poor people pay for water is worsened during a time of crisis because prices increase when there's scarcity of a resource, and then that further impacts poor people, basically. So we need to stay in the strategies in times of stability so that when crisis hits, we really are ready for it, and we have strategies that are basically future-proofed and disaster-proofed already.
Thank you so much for responding, even though I put you on the spot. Back to you, guys on stage. Closing remarks is, what's the message? What message do you have for other youth wanting to be involved in the just transition space? And also, just two questions of approaches. What message do you have for young people, other young people that want to be involved in the youth in the just transition space? But also, what would you hope? What's next after this? Like, what's next on your journey? What's next? What next? What else would you like to see happen after this essay? Are you happy with the journey ending today with the essay series here, or is there a community that you, as Sylvia said, created? What would you like to see next? So I'll start with Matsidiso. Yes.
Thank you. It's a lot of questions.
Yes, apologies.
I hope I can answer them properly. But I think for other youth, like what I would say is to not feel so intimidated. Maybe I'm speaking to my younger self here, but to not feel so intimidated by all the technicalities of like climate change, because you know it as much as, you know, there are people who are experts, which is great, and we welcome their expertise because it's much needed, but also your lived experience is a form of expertise as well, and you shouldn't be, don't feel intimidated or scared, even though in the space, because I think we've noticed, I think you talk about like climate finance being overwhelmingly corporatized. So it also feels like, you know, they dominate the space. But if you walk in and you know like what the experience is on the ground, you know your own experience, like you should, you know, don't be scared to, I know it sounds cliche, but like don't be scared to take up space, because that imposterness and like it's done on purpose. Like there's a reason why they're holding us back, but we need to fight hard and to show like we have so much to offer. We can see it with our youth perspective now, but continually as young people, I mean, we're 60% of the country. So we should, our experience is important. And then like, yeah, I hope that this is the beginning of the journey. I know it's like been a year, but I hope this is like creating a foundation, and like we'll continue to firstly interact among each other and learn from each other. I'm looking forward to reading everybody's essays. I have a lot of questions for different people because I just think that all of the topics are just so relevant. But I also think that just hearing about the PCC's work and the consultations, I want to like almost do my own monitoring and see how that comes to fruition back home, to see if there are people like, you know, what does it change? Does it start having like more inclusivity? Yeah, I think also just hoping that, you know, this is not the last time as a cohort we meet, and we should just continue like building on this and just working together and really fighting this, you know, like this climate change. And I think that we can do it and we should do it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Jody?
Thank you. A lot of questions. as mentioned. But I think first I just want to take the opportunity to give a shout out to my mentor, and something that I want to share with everyone is the biggest thing that I sort of found myself slipping into when I started writing this essay was falling back into the confines of the boxes. This is how we tackle climate change. I'm writing my essay with references, etc. But she pushed me and encouraged me to get in touch with my personal story. Chidi was saying now, their personal experiences and knowing within yourself, you alone have power and that's worthy of taking up space. So again, not at risk of repeating taking up space, but I think it's a very powerful message, where we need to take up space. And I was very privileged to also travel here today with our youngest commissioner and just hearing her experiences, so beyond what the PCC does going forward, I think it's very important that we as young people take up power. We are very privileged to have gone through this particular program. So how are we now going to open doors for others? How are we now going to use this to create meaningful engagement for those that don't have access to schools? We spoke a lot about what we're doing about education, access to STEMs, but we have a huge portion of our youth that are not in education, that are not employed, that are not in training. How are we speaking to these people? Because they themselves also have valid experiences. So our youth are in crisis. How are we aligning our common experiences? Myself, I'm a colored person from the Cape Flats. And I saw this as an opportunity to speak to my narrative, speak to my community, speak to the circumstances that don't often get spoken about in the bureaucratic processes, through the stats, through whatever balancing books we need to have from a demographic perspective. So I think going forward, for me, what's next, I would think, is to be an ambassador of change beyond what's outside of my control. I can't control what PCC does, but you guys have my email, you know where I'm at. But how are we creating those platforms? PCC, yes, please create more platforms, even for us as the co to continue engaging. How can we spread this? But me, myself, how can I be an ambassador for that change within my realm of influence? And if we all do that, who knows, we may have more than one young commissioner in the PCC. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd encourage young people to firstly get involved. There's a host of opportunities to participate in how we are governed as people in this country. So I think my first thought would be to encourage young people to get involved in your community, get involved in your ward committee, ask questions of your municipal council, comment when there's bills that are sent to the public, because those opportunities are there, and more often than not, we do not utilize them as young people because of how we've seen them as inaccessible. I would also encourage the PCC to have this on a more constant basis where young people can engage, not only to launch a report, but to just engage on how our relation is to the just transition, how our relationship is to climate change, because the people who are making the decision might not be here in 20, 30 years' time. I mean, the life cycle in our country has shown us that people barely live past 70 years. So the people who are making decisions now might not be there in 10, 20 years to come. And it's important for us to be involved in the decisions that ultimately govern our future and the country that we get to live in. And as far for myself and I'm concerned, I mean, I'm not really involved in the climate change space. So I'm more of an urban planner who works in early education and foundation phase education for children in grade 1 and 3. But I think my contribution is to just take up space and to be involved in my community, to be involved in my immediate environment, and hope that creates ripple effects for other people to be involved in other spaces as well. I think if we as young people who make up 60% of this country can share more of our ideas, can get involved more in the issues of our state, in the issues of our country, and get involved more in how decisions are made on our behalf, and we can actually force our leaders to not think on our behalf, but to think with us in the process of how we can achieve change. I think that's something that would spell positive outcomes for our country. Young people have shown that they want to be involved. Young people have shown that they want to lead change. And young people have shown that they deserve platforms. But until platforms are created for us, I think it's imperative that we force ourselves on the platforms that are there and hope we can make those platforms our own.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your journeys, and I wish you all the best in your next steps in your future endeavors as well, and hope that we meet in future work in spaces as well. Before I hand over to Blessing for vote of thanks, I would like to say thank you again to the authors for really sharing your voices and your personal stories and your lived experiences through the essays. Again, the essays will be available if you go to the PCC website. The essays are available there. For now, for those in the room, you can scan the QR code, and those online, there's a link that has been provided. Please do share it with others as well, so that they can also get to hear and learn get to hear from your lessons as well. And I think as I hand over to, and lastly, thank you to the steering committee, to the and the mentors as well that also helped to shape this series. Thank you so much. Tate, Blessings, over to you, and please respond to the question of what next for our cohort. Thank you so much.
No, thanks, colleagues. I won't be long. But I also wanted to first by inviting you to my 70th birthday, because I will reach it. And I thought there must be no doubt about how long some of us would live. But colleagues, I think let me start by congratulating all of you. I think it has been a long and winding road. The steering committee, the youth commissioners, both Mali and Ayakam, the admin team in the PCC, the co-admin team, Tumelo and Bandile, they've been, when we postponed each time we took decisions and changed them, they felt the heat. Me and Thomasing as spokespersons and communicators, so we can quickly brush you aside. But they've got to go to audit to their account officer and explain why they are cancelling a booking and why they've been working on something that they're not seeing on the table. So I really want to thank the core team from the office of the CEO that made this, making the bookings, making sure that you get your stipends and all that. And then on the com side, we really want to call upon you to continue to support. We are a unit of 3 people. And I think that we should thank them, as well as the secretariat team. Most of us, we are too to be worried about young people, even if some of you are young yourselves. But I want to thank the line function for really seeing this not as an add-on. Mentorship, attending this workshop, reading the essays, coming to the planning workshops, but also to the young people that just, accept the I know 100,000 for each one of you is a lot of money. So I want to thank you that accept the money that came in and submitted, and I'm happy that they are on the side. And the first step is I'll be calling each one of you, as long as I'm working the PCC, to convert each of your articles every week into a newspaper opinion piece with your photo. So at least I know that I go with 15 weeks of trying to meet deadlines for opinion pieces. I've picked up opinion pieces from me. They are long. The newspapers give us 700, 800 words, but I think that it's good enough from what you've done. So you're going to be popular, guys. And it will be in a variety of online and public and print publications. The second thing I want to announce is that we know that we ran parallel to this a kids campaign that we thought that we would launch and do the work, the artistic work to support the essay. We could not meet that deadline, and the reasons are based for our own integrity mainly. We could not just pick up any sponsor that was prepared to offer us the money. We really wanted to make sure that there is value for that kind. It's not cheap PR. We have decided that in the light of the fact that we are not using those pictures for the series book, we'll be using those artwork in a number of our other publications. By Friday, all the teachers and all the learners will receive letters from the PCC saying that thank you for entering. Here is your good bag. We would like to continue to engage with you. But for those learners that entered, we are starting a younger cohort version of you guys. And we'll be visiting those schools. each and every one of those schools that entered, the PCC team, not all in all, will go there, meet with the teachers, start discussing with them how they can do basic climate awareness, whether it's a school's newsletter, a school's online, but we want to support them. But together with that, we'll also be using that for a children's toolkit to basically help from children's social clubs to everything else to basically mainstream that. You heard that we had said that, and those that watched the commission meeting 2 weeks ago, so that we actually are finalizing our climate action campaign. And one of the key features there is ambassadors. Guys, we are not prepared to go and get celebrities and select guys to become ambassadors. And I know the fellow is going to say something, select guys to become ambassadors. So I now introduce you our ambassadors. And I think that, once time we reach the campaign brand, the identity, and you would be all welcome to literally be the first cohort of those. I think that we are working around the media summit, the brand summit for April. So at least I know I'm seeing you in less than a month or in a month's time at the Communications and Brand Summit. That's where we want to discuss what youth organizations can play, because what an NGO of women does for awareness should be different from what a student chapter of the Engineering Council does, Ms. van Rensbeck. So we'd have to then find the role of all other students, so that we don't only have students marching for fees must fall, there is also much for emissions must fall as students. And that's the kind of cooperation we want to have with you. Lastly, as I complete, I want to say, because the potential are there. I always brag in all kinds of my state of mind that I had the benefit of meeting the 3 Secretaries General of the UN physically, Ban Ki-moon, Kofi Annan, and I had a second of the other one, which is the current Secretary General of the UN. And I already been in South Africa. So you can understand the attention of South Africa in the international multilateral environment space. You are taken as serious people, So I think that you must see that. So if you don't keep myself over today, and somebody come and tell you that I had blessings and number before I was here in SG, don't say I did not tell you so. So as much as I'm going to keep my gentlemen, you must also keep moving. I want to keep my address, but you must keep mine might be SG before you of the UN. But I think I just want to say you've opened up opportunities. You have started on a relationship where we don't accept divorce papers. You can walk away and disappear, but we'll never accept something that says, I'm no more prepared to work with you. Just think that you are breathing aloud and not talking to us. But those words, once again, congratulations. Thank you very much. And we look forward to, but we also want you to help us to craft the ambassador program. I don't know what ambassadors do for this kind of thing. I know we've got a concept, but I think we must also be able to say, as an ambassador, I want to do the following things, so that you actually do what you're good at, and we don't just give you a script and you're basically just transition brainwashing and you really don't know what's in your areas. But with those words, once again, thank you, and I'm looking forward to working with you. And please keep your phones on the check. The SMS will be coming through for them. But also, I'm saying, my deputy, I think that you and Ignatius, the two, people think that we're many, but I'm saying in Ignatius, you try. Because he said, I only called him yesterday. And said, I will do it for this event. So in January, I just know the date on my diary, and she said, don't worry, you'll do a vote of thanks. And I said, thanks God, I don't have to do a lot because I'll mess it up. So that's ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And see you in the campus, this organization, and everybody will continue to build a society that is what?
Thank you everyone online, and apologies for running over time. And for those in the room, we'll be taking a group photo after this, and please do stay for a few, stay as well to network among each other and to hear from the WWF second team and the PCC as well. And as young people, we often say we don't have power, but we have power on the 25th of May. Use of power and go vote. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.